Almost every one of us carries this warm memory from earliest childhood. A tiny red beetle slowly crawls along your finger, working its barely visible legs, makes it all the way to the very tip, and freezes for a second, as if pondering what to do next. At that moment, you were supposed to make a wish and blow ever so gently, so the little bug would spread its wings and carry your quiet request somewhere upward, all the way to the clouds. We grew up long ago and forgot almost all our childhood superstitions, yet somewhere inside a calm certainty remains that about this particular beetle, at least, we already know everything there is to know. The shiny red back, the neat black dots, the complete harmlessness, and a kind of universal, almost familial affection. It seems there's absolutely nothing left to add. In reality, what you've held in your palm so many times is merely the cover. A very beautiful and very deceiving cover of an incredibly strange book, one that almost none of us has ever opened past the first page. And inside this book, things are happening that are hard to believe at first hearing. Living in there are peculiar bacteria that kill every future male right inside the egg, before they ever get a chance to come into the world. Crawling in there is a tiny mite that passes from beetle to beetle during mating and forever robs the infected females of their ability to leave any offspring behind. Flowing through the thin veins, there is blood filled with a special substance that serious scientists are studying right now as a possible foundation for future treatments for tuberculosis and malaria. Operating in there is a beetle that humans themselves carried with their own hands all across the globe, and in return, it calmly and methodically set about wiping its own nearest relatives off the map. And hiding in there too is a lost insect that ordinary school children, armed with simple cameras, would later search for across an entire vast country. I promise you that after this short story, you will never again be able to look at a red back with black dots as carelessly as you've looked at it until now. But before we open this book together, I want to immediately put your mind at ease on one very important point. To humans, the ladybug is genuinely harmless, and there's absolutely no reason to fear it. It doesn't bite in that dreadful sense we usually fear from insects. It doesn't carry any diseases, and if it suddenly decides to land on your hand, absolutely nothing bad will happen to you. All the amazing and at times unsettling things we're about to discuss unfold exclusively within its own tiny world and barely concern us, the big people, at all. So you can breathe easy and keep listening without any worry. And now we have to dismantle the very first and most familiar notion we hold. From early childhood, we've affectionately called it a little bug, and right there in that simple word lies the first mistake. The ladybug isn't a little bug at all. It's a genuine beetle, a close relative of the cockchafer and the shiny ground beetle, a member of the enormous and ancient order Coleoptera. It has hard wing cases, beneath which real flight wings are neatly folded, and it's built nothing like ordinary true bugs. Meanwhile, the green aphid, that very same small creature the ladybug devours with such enviable appetite, turns out to be the actual true bug. The result is an almost insulting mix-up. We filed our sweet little huntress under harmless bugs, while her prey, scientifically speaking, would far more honestly be called a bug than the ladybug itself. And ladybugs on our planet aren't just one or two species, as it might seem. Scientists have managed to describe about 5,000 different species of these beetles, and roughly 500 of them live in North America alone. Their coloring isn't always red either. Among ladybugs, you'll find yellow ones, orange ones, black ones, some with bright spots, and some without any at all, some with stripes, and some with fine speckles. And what matters especially for our whole story today is that not every one of these 5,000 is so unconditionally beneficial and kind to the garden as we're used to thinking. Among them are truly ferocious predators. There are quiet, inconspicuous species, and you'll even find genuine pests, but more on that a little later. To give you a real sense of just how deeply people love this little beetle, let me share one completely real and almost unbelievable fact. In the United States of America, the ladybug has been officially, at the most serious governmental level, made the symbol of several states at once. The modest nine-spotted ladybug was solemnly declared the official insect of the entire state of New York in 1989. And besides New York, 6 whole states, Delaware, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Ohio, and North Dakota, chose the ladybug as their living symbol. Just think about that. Grown, serious people, actual lawmakers, deliberately gathered together, debated the matter, and officially decided that this tiny beetle deserves to represent an entire state on equal footing with the flag, the seal, and the state bird. And this detail about the 9-spotted ladybug and the state of New York, I'm really going to ask you to remember right now. At the moment, it seems like just a sweet, pleasant little fact, another piece of evidence of universal popular affection for this beetle. But closer to the finale of our story, this very detail will turn into one of the saddest and most completely unexpected twists, and then you'll finally understand why I was so insistent that you remember it. So that's what the beautiful cover looks like. On one side of it, our childhood wish, you blew it off your palm and wished for something good. On the other side, the official symbol of 7 American states at once, a universal favorite, the picture on a greeting card. It seems as though we're holding in our hands the most understandable, kind, and safe creature in the entire wide world. And now, we'll finally turn this cover over and look inside for the first time, to where, beneath the beautiful red back, an entirely different life is waiting for us. So, we finally turned the beautiful cover and looked inside, and there a hunter greets us right away. A genuine, ruthless, and very skilled hunter that spends its entire short life doing nothing but tracking, chasing down, and devouring other living creatures. That sweet red back we so love to admire belongs to a creature for which the surrounding world is one enormous cafeteria, stocked with living food on every side. The ladybug's main prey remains, as always, the familiar green aphid, and it's precisely for this passion for aphids that gardeners and growers all over the world adore it so much. But if you look more closely, it turns out this beetle's menu is far richer and more varied than we're used to thinking. Besides aphids, the ladybug happily devours scale insects, which hide under tiny dense shells, hunts mealybugs swaddled in white waxy fluff, catches small white flies that lift off leaves in whole little clouds, and even deals with spider mites, which you can hardly make out with the naked eye. All these tiny pests that plague our gardens and fields turn out to be nothing more than dishes in the ladybug's daily lunch, and the appetite of this tiny beetle is genuinely impressive. A single ladybug, all on its own, is capable of eating up to 60 aphids in just one day, and that's not counting all the scale insects, mealybugs, small leafhoppers, and mites it picks up along the way. Just let that number really sink in. A creature the size of a pea, one that fits easily on the tip of your finger, destroys several dozen other living beings in a day, and doesn't look the slightest bit tired afterward. If a human ate in similar proportions relative to body size, our meals would look from the outside like something truly monstrous. And here begins the first truly astonishing story, one that's hard to believe right away. Among ladybugs, there's a special predatory species that was bred specifically to combat the mealybug, and it goes by the name Cryptolaemus. Well, the larvae of this beetle resorted to a piece of cunning that not every human would have thought up. They've learned to look exactly like their own prey. These larvae are covered in the same white waxy fluff as mealybugs, and they sit on the very same plants, and from the outside, it's completely impossible to tell them apart. It seems like wonderful camouflage, a perfect way to sneak up close to a victim. But hidden inside this trick is a bitter joke played by nature. Gardeners who specifically bought and released this predator to save their plants spot the white lumps on the leaves and take them for pests, and they start diligently scraping them off the plants with their own hands. The picture turns out sad and absurd. A person releases an expensive helper to set things in order, and then wipes that same helper off the leaves, mistaking their savior for an enemy. But how does a ladybug even find food in this enormous world of its own, where every little leaf is a whole continent? It turns out it barely uses vision in the way we understand it, and instead relies on subtle chemical signals that you and I are utterly incapable of picking up. A female ladybug doesn't lay her eggs just anywhere, at random. She deliberately searches out a spot near a large colony of pests, so that her future children, the moment they hatch, find themselves seated at a set table. And here's the most astonishing part. That very white waxy coating that mealybugs so diligently use to cover themselves for protection from danger works for the ladybug in exactly the opposite way. This protective layer becomes a tempting lure for her and a direct signal that right here, right beneath it, there's plenty of fresh food and it's worth laying offspring nearby. The victim's defense turns into a road sign for the hunter, and the mealybug, with its own hands, gives its hiding place away to the ladybug. And one female produces a surprisingly large number of these children over a season. A female of a common ladybug species can lay several hundred eggs, and sometimes that number tips over a full 1,000 in just a couple of spring and summer months. 1,000 future hunters from a single mother. That's a huge army that spreads out across the garden and gets down to work. That said, it would be unfair to paint the ladybug as some kind of invincible, all-powerful creature. Prey doesn't always come easily, and at times, victims put up a very real fight. Some aphids, those that live in large, tightly packed colonies, have special relatives that scientists have actually nicknamed soldiers. These tiny defenders throw themselves at an approaching ladybug all at once, shove it, scare it off, and try with all their might to drive it away from their colony. The small, soft-bodied aphid, which seems utterly helpless to us, can in fact stand up for its home, and a ladybug's lunch doesn't always go as calmly and as filling as it would like. And to round off this section, one more twist awaits us, one that finally shatters the familiar picture. Since childhood, we've been firmly convinced that any ladybug is an unquestionable friend of the garden and an enemy of all pests. But hidden among these 5,000 species are some genuine traitors. There are ladybugs that don't hunt at all, but instead feed on plants themselves, gnawing at leaves and causing real damage to crops. The most famous of them is the Mexican bean beetle, which looks exactly like our familiar friend the ladybug, but is considered a dangerous agricultural pest. So it turns out that even within a single family, both heroes and villains coexist, and they resemble one another so closely that telling them apart at first glance is almost impossible. So this is what the first layer of this beetle's real life turns out to be. Before us stands not the cute little bug from a postcard, but a skillful hunter with an enormous appetite, which finds prey by smell, deceives enemies with cunning disguises, fights its prey's defenders, and among whose relatives you'll find genuine pests. And that was only the hunting part. What awaits us next is something far stranger. What happens with this beetle even before it's born, right inside a tiny egg? We're used to thinking that childhood is roughly the same for all creatures, and is bound to be a little touching. Some hatch from an egg, some are born very tiny, and then they gradually grow and become adults, just as they should. But if you take a look at the very beginning of a ladybug's life, you'll find that its childhood is arranged far more astonishingly and in places far harsher than any kind fairy tale we could dream up. Let's start with the fact that the ladybug goes through complete metamorphosis, and the adult beetle with the red back is barely recognizable in its early life. First, the female lays tiny yellow eggs, neatly gathered into tidy little clusters. Then larvae emerge from them, and these look nothing at all like the cute ladybug we know. The larva is elongated, dark, quick, and rather toothy, and many people, spotting it on a leaf, take this creature for some dangerous pest and hurry to get rid of it in alarm. This larva molts several times, shedding skin that's grown too tight and getting bigger with each round. And then it goes still, turns into an immobile pupa, and inside that pupa, its entire body is rebuilt from scratch so that it can finally emerge into the light as the very ladybug we all love so much. But the most astonishing thing is hidden not even in these transformations, but in what happens to the offspring before they ever come into the world. The two-spot ladybug, one of the most common and widespread, carries special bacteria inside its body. These tiny tenants are passed by inheritance from mother to her children, and they're engaged in a business that looks frightful. They kill all the future males right inside the egg before they ever get a chance to come into the world. The male embryos simply stop developing, and no one ever hatches from such eggs. And their sisters, who safely make it into the world, get an extra reserve of strength at the very start of their lives because of this. The consequences of such a strange arrangement turn out to be truly remarkable. Because of these invisible bacteria, up to 80 and even 90% of all two-spot ladybug offspring end up being female. Just let that picture sink in properly. In a brood that should have been split evenly between males and females, almost no males remain, and entire generations of these beetles are born and live as almost entirely female. And what's especially curious for you and me, scientists have found such infected ladybug lineages not somewhere on the other side of the planet, but in a perfectly ordinary Moscow population right next to us. Now let's set this eerie secret of birth aside for a moment and look at how the ladybug survives the hardest time of the year: cold winter. One species, the so-called convergent ladybug, has a truly unique way of coping with the frost. When autumn arrives, a whole new generation of these beetles lifts off from their familiar fields and sets out on a real journey. They climb high up into the cool mountains and gather there in giant, dense clusters, where on a small patch of ground many thousands and even millions of beetles can fit at once. They spend the entire long winter like that, pressed tightly against one another and barely moving, slowly burning through the reserves of fat they built up over the summer. And when spring comes, this living red river flows back down from the mountains to the fields to hunt aphids again and leave behind new offspring. And now the most unusual story of this section awaits us, one that truly makes your skin crawl. Ladybugs have a parasite of their own that behaves in a completely astonishing way. It's a tiny mite, and it lives in a very unexpected place, right under the beetle's wing covers, in a secluded space on its back. This mite feeds on its host's blood, but the most surprising thing is exactly how it moves from one ladybug to another. Its little larvae pass from beetle to beetle during mating, at the very moment when two ladybugs find themselves right up against each other. In essence, what we have before us is a real disease that's passed from partner to partner, just as it happens in other living creatures. And the consequences of this strange disease are about as serious as they get. A female infected with the mite very quickly loses the ability to produce offspring and becomes sterile. And this doesn't happen to just one unfortunate ladybug. It strikes a frighteningly huge number of beetles all at once. At the very height of the season, when ladybugs are actively searching for mates, up to 90% of all adult two-spot ladybugs in a population end up infected with this mite. Just picture the scale of it. Almost the entire adult portion of these beetles is carrying around a tiny bloodsucker that quietly and invisibly robs them of their future offspring. So that's what the real childhood and coming of age of this beetle actually looks like once you strip away all the fairy tale charm. It's a world where invisible bacteria decide who even gets to be born and who stays trapped inside the egg. It's a world where an entire generation makes a grueling mountain trek just to survive the winter, huddled in one massive shivering pile on the cold peaks. And it's a world where a parasite spreads across the beetles' backs, capable of wiping out the offspring of nearly the entire population in a single season. You have to admit, all of this bears very little resemblance to that sweet, carefree image from a greeting card we've been carrying around in our heads this whole time. And you know what's the most astonishing part? Up to this point, we've only talked about how the ladybug is built on the inside and how it comes into the world. But it also has a weapon of its own, hidden right there in its blood. The very same weapon that not only saves it from enemies, but is being seriously studied by people right now as a possible foundation for future medicines. And that's exactly what we'll be talking about in the next part. This remarkable transformation of a bitter little drop into a genuine pharmacy.